Hello, my name is Dave Taylor, and today is June 26, 2018, and I am walking down the streets of a ghost town that was known as Pithole City. So I'm here in Venango County, Pennsylvania, and this area all around me was once a metropolis that boasted over 15,000 residents at its prime. Unfortunately, its prime only lasted a period of about 3 years until the town went bust. And so I'm here in Venango County visiting this site and some other sites that are connected with John Wilkes Booth, who at one point considered himself to be an oilman and decided to go into the oil business. In 1859, oil was discovered in Venango County, and so it started a huge influx of residents into the area looking to make their fortune in oil. And so John Wilkes Booth was one of those people who decided to invest in oil in a couple different places. One of them was in Franklin, Pennsylvania, where he had his own well of his own, but he also invested here in Pithole. Pithole gets its name from a creek that runs, the creek runs that way, past the tree line. And there was great land speculation in the area after the oil was found in Titusville, not too far to the north of here. There's great land speculation that there might be oil here. And so Booth in 1864 invested $1,000 to get a 30th of a share of land property here in Pithole, and in the hopes that they would dig for oil and it would make him rich. So he spent $1,000 of his money investing here in Pithole, but by the time anything was found here, Booth had divested himself of his share in Pithole, because at that point he had changed his mind from becoming an oil baron to becoming pretty much the first assassin in United States history. But in 1864, we know Booth was in the Pennsylvania region where I am now, and likely visited Pithole in order to do some land speculating, and that's when he invested $1,000. Pithole today is kind of an outdoor museum where they have reconstructed what all the roads in the village kind of was like, even though none of the buildings remain. But every once in a while, you're walking through what looks like just trails, and you'll come across these little huts that get information about the rise and fall of Pithole. In addition, there are little street signs at each intersection of these trails, kind of telling you what you're walking on and where you're going. And so this place has a connection not only to Booth, who invested, and which, by the way, Booth's oil well did provide money. So he invests in this in 1864. Early in 1864, and then he gets rid of it in September of 1864, October, when his plans has turned to abduction and then later assassination. And so he leaves his share of the Pithole property to his sister, Rose, and then he just leaves the area. However, in January of 1865, behind me, if you would continue down this road, which is First Street, and then through the woods past Pithole Creek, you would come across the site of the Fraser well, which hit oil in January of 1865. Now, Booth and his group didn't own that land, but theirs was adjacent and just kind of on the other side of the creek, on a land grab that was nearby. And so this was a big boom when they finally found oil, and what started bringing people here to Pithole, and started in January of 1865. People start moving in. They hadn't dug Booth's well yet, and they would not do so until after Booth assassinates the president. However, when they do, they find that the well that he invested in became a gusher and actually pulled a huge amount of oil out of the ground and made Rose a lot of money. So had he been a little more patient and not so angry against the president, he could have become that millionaire he always wanted to be in oil, or at least a very wealthy person. Unfortunately, Pithole's lifespan was not long. So many other wells were put in here, like Booth's well, like the Fraser well, that they really sucked the reservoir of oil out of here really quickly. And so even though at its heyday, they were pulling out thousands of barrels of crude oil a day, as the time went on, and even just into the beginning of 1866, so just almost a year later, the production has slowed down considerably because they're just zapping this place dry. Even while at the same time, this little community is growing and growing. And so at the end of First Street here, the last corner is Holmead Street, and that was just a metropolis of hotels and bars and restaurants and apothecaries and everything you can imagine. This town just came up out of the weeds overnight. And actually where I'm standing now at the corner of First Street and Mason kind of located in this wooded area behind me, was at one point the Murray's Theater. So it was one of 2, maybe 3 theaters that popped up here in Pithole City in this period of about a year. And Murray's Theater, we don't think Booth ever performed here. However, after the assassination of Lincoln, 2 of the cast members from Our American Cousin, they were a married couple by the name of Johnny Evans and his wife Kate Evans, actually came up here because, hey, they were people making money in the oil wells who would graciously give it to actors, and they didn't have any entertainment. And so after the Lincoln's assassination in the fall of 1865, Johnny Evans and Kate Evans leave Ford Stock Company and come here to Pithole and perform at the Murphy Theater, which stood right here. And in fact, Johnny Evans, even though he was only 26 at the time, the same age as Booth, he suffered a stroke while here in Pithole and then was also suffering from tuberculosis. And Johnny Evans will die here in Pithole in December of 1865. He's the first of the cast members of Our American Cousin to die, after the fact. And so Pithole not only has the connection to Booth investing in the oil region here and coming here, but also that one of the actors who was with him and saw him assassinate Lincoln also passed away. It's a fascinating area if you're ever around here to kind of walk through. They have a visitor center, which is the big building kind of up on the hill there, but they're only open on weekends, June through August. So I'm here on a Tuesday, so they're not open. But it's a beautiful outdoor museum with these little exhibit cases and little signs all over the place showing what was once this huge town of which there was nothing left. And they say the boom and bust happened very quickly. January of 1865, oil is found, everyone moves here. By January of 1866, production is down and people start moving out. So they had at one point 15,000, 20,000 people. And yet by 1868, they were down to 2,000 people. And by 1870, so it's just 5 years after its establishment, there were only 200 people living in Pithole. And when the oil well dried up and they suffered a couple fires because everything was built kind of like this out of wood really quickly, everyone moved out. And by 1877, the town's charter was revoked by the state of Pennsylvania and the land was sold back to the state. So now it is just this it's a historic site. It's this outdoor museum that's run by the Pennsylvania Museum Bureau or something like that, in conjunction with the Drake Well Museum in Titusville, which is where the first oil boom kind of occurred here in Pennsylvania in 1859. But I highly recommend if you ever can get out here. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it doesn't look like much, but definitely would be great for hiking trails, and there's history all around here. So I know this was a long one, but I drove 6 hours to get here, so I was going to make sure I said everything I learned about this place when I got here. So this is Dave Taylor on June 26, 2018, signing off from Pithole City, Pennsylvania.